Welcome back to WordCamp Santa Clarita Valley 2021. This is day one, and we've all just had lunch. Well, we've had a lunch break anyway. Hi, this is Ron Amick coming to you from Greater Los Angeles, which is usually just larger Los Angeles, but today with this WordCamp, it's really greater. I own a WordPress agency and am avidly learning and teaching myself and implementing all things accessibility. I have been a fan of WordPress for probably 12 years at least, and was privileged to be an organizer of the first WordCamp Santa Clarita Valley 2019. Thank you for joining Beyond 99 Red Balloons, a pragmatic guide to alternative text, presented by AmyJune Hineline. Please add your questions to the YouTube chat feed, and we will do our best to answer them after the presentation. You can also follow up afterwards with direct contact with AmyJune in the general Slack channel, a link for which is on the homepage for this event. AmyJune Hineline is the open source community ambassador and quality assurance engineer at Canopy Studios. That's with a K, K-A-N-O-P-I. Canopy Studios, a Northern California web agency that seems to have a love for treehouses. AmyJune trains, presents, volunteers, and collaborates at camps of all kinds and conferences across North America, including WordCamps, and those of other content management systems that we will not mention here, unless asked. She brings tremendous community participation and leadership experience, including co-organizing ALLY Talks. That's A11Y Talks, all one word. I believe it's A11ytalks.com. You have to look that up. It's an online monthly meetup where guest speakers talk about all things accessibility. Sounds like a good thing to do. One of the core components now of building an inclusive web is that very thing, accessibility. AmyJune also finds time somehow to be a hospice nurse, so she is well aware of web and contribution. She's well aware of individuals' needs that may differ in terms of web accessibility. It may differ from the mainstream. Alt text, if you aren't aware, is #1 in the WCAG guidelines for making websites accessible. Alt text is written content that supports images for users who cannot see the images or who use assistive technology such as screen readers to appreciate what the images may show. I'm happy to say that in my first 24 years of web development, adding alt text was something that I actually did religiously. Sadly, I did it very poorly. So let's hear what AmyJune Hineline can share about writing alt text. And it's not as simple as you may think. And this is information I would have liked to have had a long time ago. So take it.
Hi there. Welcome to Beyond 99 Red Balloons, a pragmatic guide to alternative text. I want to thank the organizers of WordCamp Santa Clarita for inviting me to speak about a topic I'm really an advocate of, and that's accessibility. A little bit of housekeeping. There are a lot of images in this slide deck. Some of them I do not describe for the sake of the presentation, and then others that provide any content that's relevant to the information I'll be describing. My name is AmyJune Hineline. I am the open source community ambassador for Canopy Studios. I am a hospice nurse by trade, so I understand how some people can have trouble navigating and accessing digital assets, even things as simple as checking their mail. Some things I do in the community, because I do work in open source. I organize and market Ally Talks, A11Y, which is accessibility talks. It's a virtual online meetup where we have speakers and guests and discuss all things accessibility. And it's platform agnostic. I'm a mentor for several open source projects, including WordPress. I help on the WordPress diversity team by leading speaker workshops. I'm also on the Drupal community working group community health team because the health of our community is super important. Canopy brings me here today. Canopy Studios is an open source website strategy, design, development, and support agency. We specialize in intelligent data-driven solutions. And we're hiring WordPress engineers and tech leads along with Drupal tech leads and developers. We're looking for support staff in the form of project management and UX and UI designers. And with all of those roles, we would really like some accessibility consultancy to be rolled into those because accessibility is an important part of building websites. I am on Ohlone lands today presenting in Northern California outside of the San Francisco Bay Area. And what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about accessibility, of course. And to do that, we're going to go through some terms and definitions because there's a lot of acronyms out there. We'll talk about the different image types. I'm not going to go into all of them because there's quite a few, but I've kind of honed it down into 6 image types. We're going to look at alternative text and what it is and different ways to use alternative text to best convey our pictures and images into text alternatives. And we're going to look at social media. And then at the end of the slide decks, there's some resources and tools available for you folks beyond today. Terms and definitions. Some of you folks may already know these, but I am going to go through them rather quickly for the sake of brevity. But I think it's important that we either remind each other of our goals in accessibility and that we teach new folks the terms and definitions as they become onboarded. There's the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It prohibits discrimination and guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else to participate in mainstream American life. And what that really boils down to is to enjoy employment opportunities, to participate in state and local governments and their services, and to be able to purchase goods. And then there's the 508. Section 508 is a procurement law that requires federal agencies to develop, procure, maintain, and use information and communications technology that is accessible to people who live with disabilities. And this is regardless of whether or not they work for the federal government. To be 508 compliant means to be WCAG 2.0 compliant. So what's WCAG, you ask? Okay, so WCAG is an acronym for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The World Wide Web Consortium, which has an acronym of its own, W3C, has developed the WCAG guidelines to normalize how we measure accessibility internationally. And WCAG is developed with the goal of providing a single shared standard for web content accessibility that meets not only the needs of individuals, but organizations and governments as well. And throughout the world, many countries, including the United States, reference these guidelines when establishing their own criteria. And then it goes even deeper. WCAG is broken down into 3 levels, which is A, AA, and AAA, and each increasing A in the level indicates additional success criteria to follow. So when we think of WCAG guidelines, what they really are is a shared document of success criterias, and then the AAA and AA define additional criteria. Level A is minimal compliance. If your website doesn't meet at least this level, it means that it's really hard for people with disabilities to use your site. AA indicates an acceptable compliance, which means that your website is usable and understandable for most people. And then there's AAA. This is optimal compliance, which means that your website is accessible to really the maximum number of users with or without disabilities. So AAA really indicates that highest level of usability too. So the more accessible your website, the more usable it is for more people. And then there's POUR. This is an acronym for some high-level principles that describe functional accessibility. There's perceivable. Perceivable means that the user can successfully identify content and interface elements by means of the senses. There's operable, which means that people can successfully use interactive elements such as controls, buttons, and navigation. Understandable, people are able to comprehend the content and learn and remember how to use the interface. And the last one is robust. And this is all about how people choose to interact with your website, what technology they use to interact with your website. This includes online documents, multimedia, and other information formats as well, any sort of digital asset. And there's a few of the WCAG success criteria around the use of images, and that's what we're really talking about today, right? You know, alternative text. And I do want to remind folks that WCAG is a standard, a technical standard, not an introduction to accessibility. So we're going to be looking at non-text content, you know, all non-text content that is presented to the user has a text alternative that has sort of an equal purpose. Images of text, you know, if our technologies are being used to achieve visual presentation, the text used to convey the information rather than the images of text. And then images of text, no exception. This is when you have decorative images. So these are the three standards that are kind of woven in and out of this presentation. So let's break it down. What makes our content accessible? There's those 4 broad parameters. You know, we want to make sure that it's easy to see, so we accommodate visual needs. The Center for Disease Control reports that something like 12 million people who are 40 years and over in the United States live with some kind of vision impairment. And that includes 1 million people who are blind. But remember, other factors make it hard visually. You know, think of cracked cell phones or glare on your screen. We want to make sure that people can interact with our website, so we accommodate motor needs. You know, this can be folks who live with palsy from Parkinson's, or maybe paraplegia from something like ALS or an accident. But it also can be folks who are handling a baby on a city bus and only have one arm available to use to swipe on their cell phone. Auditory needs, we want to make sure that it's easy to hear, so we accommodate auditory needs. When we address these needs, we help folks who not only who are hard of hearing and our deaf friends, but also folks who are in noisy environments too. And then the last principle is making sure that things are easy to understand, so we accommodate those cognitive needs. This can include people who are distracted, have a difficult time focusing. With all of these 4 parameters, we want to make the experience as equivalent as possible, regardless of what we cannot control. What's assistive technology? This technology allows and empowers users who live with low vision or cognitive and learning disabilities to access information and maintain privacy. Assistive technology removes a barrier to the internet or digital information for a lot of folks. So a couple of different ones I want to highlight are screen readers. Screen readers are used to listen to the content of the web page. They convert text to speech, but we should keep in mind that screen readers can be used with visuals on the web page for folks with cognitive challenges as well. There's also screen magnification software. I don't know if it's just me, but it seems like a lot of websites are getting smaller and smaller with the fonts. And I really have to hit that Command++ for screen magnification. And screen magnification is true to its name. It's used to enlarge the screen content. So it's easier for us to read, especially if we live with partial impairment. It's also used by people with partial sight to enlarge the content. But also screen magnifiers sometimes have the text-to-speech functionality built into them as well. And here's some more assistive technology that don't necessarily have to do with images, but I want to just kind of inform people, what assistive technology means. There's eye tracking, accelerators, keyboard customization, pop-up and animation blockers, refreshable braille displays, reading assistants, and page maps. All of these things can help aid people navigate your websites. So who uses screen readers? The organization WebAIM conducted a screen reader survey to determine how and why users use screen readers. And they found that 87%, almost 88% of people use a screen reader because they live with a disability. And of those, 88%, 71% exclusively rely on screen reader audio. So making sure your website has the ability, or screen readers have the ability to use their website, is super important. And respondents to the same survey indicated that they're slightly more likely to use a mobile app than a web app for common online tasks. So we do have to keep in mind mobile versus web accessibility as well. 51% of people will use a mobile app instead of a website. So why do we love images? Images enhance our content, especially for people who live with cognitive or learning disabilities. We oftentimes include images and media that support and add to our information and concepts. People who live with low vision will use images as cues to help orientate themselves on the page. And media, including social media, use images for conversions. Having images on posts lead to a higher click-through rate and a higher return on your investment, or ROI. But images can be major barriers when they're not accessible. So I want to go through some of the ways that accessible images benefit different users. People using screen readers, the text alternative can be read aloud or rendered as refreshable braille. People using speech input software, users put the focus on a button or a linked image with a single voice command. Oftentimes the text alternative can be read aloud for people browsing speech-enabled websites. Mobile web users sometimes have images turned off, especially if they're roaming, for data roaming, and though some people have poor internet connection, so it's just easier for them to keep their images turned off. And then accessible images are also good for search engine optimization, because now our images become indexable by search engines. So there are lots of different types of images we add to our sites. I'm going to focus on simple, complex, images of text, groups of images, and image maps. We'll look at all of these a little bit closer in the next few slides. And some common use for images, images can be used as links, including pagination and anchor links. Images can be logos or decorative. Images can improve usability by making orientation and interactive elements easier to use. And we'll go over some of these individual rules as we go over the images in alt text. So simple images, we're going to start there. They are images that convey simple information. Simple images must be described with alternative text or alt text, and this alt text is a short, sweet description of the content of the image. And really, it's usually invisible to people who can't see the image, but is exposed to people who are using assistive technologies like screen readers or refreshable braille. The description should convey the content and functionality of the image as concisely as possible to provide access to the content of the image without adding a ton of details. So let's look at a simple image. A simple image can be a headshot. For a headshot, we want to include the full person's name. Regardless, if you say the name in the surrounding text, include their name in the alt text. Say that it's a screenshot. Just by saying that the image is a screenshot, you really convey several things about the image and the person in it. Maybe they're professional and they're wearing business attire. You don't need much more than that. If the person is doing something, describe it. Are they holding a award? Are they leaning against a tree? But don't over describe the person either. Especially, we don't want to make assumptions when we're describing people. We want to make sure that we don't make assumptions surrounding gender or identity, socioeconomic, sexual expression, race. Leave these descriptions out of your alt text for individual people unless it's really communicating some important information that can't be accessed any other way. So for this image, I would use something like this. Headshot of dead or alive Peter Burns reaching forward with a black eye patch on. And remember, screen readers read things, so it can be really boring and cumbersome to hear a screen reader repeat headshot, headshot, headshot on a team page. So be mindful of that as well. Complex images. These are graphs, charts, diagrams. They contain too much information to really be effectively described using alternative text. So these images should be described using a long description. Long description is a more detailed description that provides equivalent access to the information of the image. The question to ask yourself, not only for complex images, but for any image in general is, given the current context, what information is this image intended to communicate? So with that, the same information must be provided to people who are unable to see that image. A long description sometimes has to include the structure necessary to communicate the content of the images, like a heading, a list, or a data table. So here's an infographic, which is an example of a complex image. And this is a tour poster for a band. So infographics communicate important information to the user that screen readers aren't able to recognize. So a couple of the general rules would be, include all the text that occurs within that image. If you can, consider removing the text from your images and inserting it on the page itself. But if you do have text in your image, you need to make sure that you include all of the text that occurs there. And account for layout too. The order of information can be crucial to understanding the message. So be sure to describe the layout of your graphic, such as where the text is placed in relation to the image, in addition to the whole of the content. For something like this, I would say a Descendants tour posters, they're at the Whiskey for 5 nights. And then I would go down and I would talk about all of the dates and the bands that they're playing with. I would give the information that all shows are all ages. And then I would say that the image includes a graphic of Milo reading a newspaper. Decorative images. If an image is purely decorative and does not convey any information or any meaning, there are several methods for telling the screen reader to ignore the images. Images can be decorative when they're for styling, like borders and spacers and corners. Perhaps they're illustrative of text, but not contributing any more information than what the page does around them. And sometimes they can be decorative because they're identified and described by the surrounding text. So when can you skip writing alternative text? There's really only two situations where an image can be considered decorative. And it's important, that's why I'm repeating them. The image provides no important information or content. If the image conveys absolutely no information necessary to the user, it can be considered decorative. The second reason would be the information of the image is repeated nearby on the page. You know, the exact information is communicated, you know, in a caption or surrounding paragraph. But these instances are rare. You will almost never have an image that does not need alt text. When in doubt, it's always better to give more information than not enough. And if your image is used to evoke emotion, it would be a disservice to your content consumers not to include the alt text. Another type of image would be an image that includes text. Readable text is presented within the image itself. If the image is not a logo, we want to avoid text in images. But if images of text are used, the text alternative should contain the same words as in the image. We have to remember that using actual text is more flexible than images. You know, it can be resized without losing clarity, and background and text colors can be modified to suit whoever's reading your page and what their reading preferences are. And one of the reasons why we don't really want to do this is images can become distorted when they're zoomed in and out. So if you have situations where images of text cannot be avoided, the alt text must really contain the same text as in the image. So logos are a good example of this. You know, every logo needs alternative text. So say that the image is a logo. You know, assistive technology doesn't know the difference between logos and other images. So sometimes throwing in that word logo will help users understand the purpose. So follow the format, you know, organization name and logo. Include any text that's in the image, you know, and then follow that standard format. If your logo is a link, please follow the practices for linked images, which we're going to talk about a couple slides in. But for this image, I would say MTV logo, music television. Click this to navigate to the MTV website. There's groups of images. These are multiple images that convey a single piece of information. You know, if we have one of these, the text alternative for one image should convey the information for the whole set. Right here, we have an album cover with a rating. You know, this group of 5 stars combined shows a product rating. So say there are 5 stars, 4 are filled in, and one of them is, you know, 3/4 filled in. That indicates the overall rating. So the text alternative for the first image would say rating 4.7 out of 5 stars, and then all of the other images would have a null or empty attribute. Image maps. Image maps contain multiple clickable areas. You know, they can be park maps, decision trees, organizational charts. The text alternative for an image that contains these multiple clickable areas is sort of 2-part. It should provide an overall context for the set of links, and then each individual clickable area should also have alternative text that describes the purpose or destination of the link. So how do you write alternative text for linked images? Linked images require alt text no matter what, and involve a few different considerations for accessibility. So we never want to mark these as decorative. We want to include any and all of the text in the link image. You want to consider the surrounding text, of course. You know, you don't want to repeat any of that text around the image, but you want to describe any additional visual information the image is communicating. And then you want to avoid saying link to or click to in the alt text. You know, screen readers automatically identify these as links by saying link or clickable graphic. So when you add that, it'll be redundant for a screen reader. So something like this would be the general alt text for this image would be a map of music halls in San Francisco. And then each clickable area would say like the bottom one, Amnesia Beer and Music Hall. It's temporarily closed, but click here to navigate to the website. So some do's and don'ts. Don't begin your image with the words image of or picture of. You know, again, your consumers are already most likely that they already know that they're on the image. And many times that software will announce the image. Don't use a file name. The technology will read the file name, and this isn't very helpful, especially in something like screenshot.jpg. Don't be too wordy. You might leave your consumers behind if there's too much information. Please don't rely on AI or artificial intelligence to provide the alternative text for you. They don't often get it right. And make sure that you use a space. You don't use a space between your quotes for a decorative image, you know, quote, space, quote. You want to just use 2 quotes. And some do's. For descriptions, users generally want a few things. Most important, the purpose of the image, you know, and some of those supplement details can be the location, colors involved, you know, red shoes, red balloons, any feelings or emotions that might be conveyed. Who is present, you know, how many people are in there, what people are in there, what are they holding, what are they doing, and anything that is actively happening. The WCAG is sort of a one-size-fits-all guideline for authoring image descriptions, but we want to keep in mind that descriptions need to be responsive to the context in which the image is found. So not all descriptions are really created equal. So again, back to that purpose of the image. There are times when you want to know that there's a man with a hat in his pocket. You know, for this image, there's a man with a hat in the pocket. But other times you want your readers to know that Bruce Springsteen has a baseball cap in his Levi's jeans back pocket while he's standing in front of an American flag wearing a Western style belt. To put it into a more usable context, you know, another example would be a group of animals standing in a field. We could use that alt text. But other times we want to know that all the animals are in the zoo and that they're bored, you know, especially when we're talking about something like a news article or an op-ed piece. So clarify the purpose of the image. And let's just roll into some fun examples. You know, we're going to look at some 80s music imagery because that's always fun for me. So let's look at the alt text Rio. What do you think of when you hear Rio? Do you think of this? Rio. But you can also have the same alt text for an image like this, Rio. So I want to have an exercise in presenting a little bit better alternative text for folks. So instead of just Rio, this would be the iconic statue of Christ the Redeemer looking over the city of Rio de Janeiro. And the second one might say something like Duran Duran's album cover Rio by artist Patrick Nagel. So the next alternative text, men without makeup. Let's visualize. What could that possibly be an image of? Men with makeup. So here's an image of men with makeup. And here's an image with men with makeup. You can see they're really different. So let's look at some alternative text we can use to help clarify those images. So the band members of Kiss with full black and white face makeup versus Dave Navarro with a smirk and eyeliner on before the Vogue photo shoot. Dead bug. This is a fun one. So what do you visualize when you hear the alternative text dead bug? Well, it could be something like this or this. So let's look at, clarifying alt text for these. A bug on a green leaf carrying a stack of dead bugs on its back versus a Volkswagen Beetle with a Grateful Dead logo on its hood. Again, they're both dead bugs, but very different. ACDC. So we have this image of ACDC alt text and this one with the same alt text. Perhaps we could say the symbols of ACDC, alternating current, a tilde over a line, DC, a line over a dashed line, ACDC, alternating current, direct current, versus this alt text, ACDC Back in Black album cover. Flock of seagulls. So we have this image of a flock of seagulls and this image of a flock of seagulls. They're both correct, but if you didn't have that visual cue, you wouldn't know what we were talking about. So let's examine and look a little closer at these images. A flock of seagulls flying against a bright blue sky versus the band Flock of Seagulls posing with 80s style clothes and hairstyles. Again, they're both flock of seagulls, but very different. Alt text is important for social media images too. Each platform has its own directions for adding text to images. So I want to kind of reference that WebAIM survey I talked about at the beginning of the presentation. They also looked at social media accessibility. Only 53% of people found social media somewhat accessible, and 16% found it not very accessible at all. So a quick win to our websites would be to bring up those percentages in increasing the accessibility of our images. Here's a picture, a screenshot of what it looks like to add text in a Twitter app. There is a way to easily increase the accessibility of our media, and lots of the social media apps already provide options for alt text and captions, but unfortunately, many of them aren't enabled by default, and you have to go and turn them on. A search on the internet with like how to turn on alt text for Twitter, how to turn on alt text for Facebook. There's lots of good articles if you were to do a search on those. And again, most of the time the apps have accessibility settings, they're just not on by default. So now what? We're at the end of the presentation. What can we do moving forward? Communication is really important. Work with your team, work with, if you're a web developer or designer, work with your content creators, setting up style guides and style sheets, defining the voice and feel of your content, making sure your WYSIWYGs, what you see is what you get, or your editors have tooltips, and that our communicators are trained on how to use them. If we train our designers and our web developers for accessibility, we really need to train our content editors and creators as well. Perhaps having an alt text as a required field, the person who's entering content can't move forward unless they enter alt text. And again, remember that accessibility is a moving target. Now that you know how to make your images more accessible, perhaps going back, a little bit at a time, pick 5 images a week on your website and go back and add alternative text to those. And remember that the rules are always changing. So make sure that you keep up with the standards and definitions as they change. And I want to thank you for listening today. This is the first time I gave this presentation, so it's pretty exciting. I love talking about accessibility. I love answering questions. I think that there's a few minutes left. This is a recording, so we'll see what it's like in real life. But in case you have a question that doesn't get answered, you can find me across the internet, Volkswagen Chick. Volkswagen Chick across the media. And then I'll include a link to the slides, which has some additional tools and resources available for folks. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of WordCamp Santa Clarita. And I can't wait to meet everyone in person.
But wait, AmyJune, you can't leave us that quickly. Come on, we've got some questions for you. Were you going to rush outside and jump in one of those Volkswagens that you seem to?
What's funny is I drive a Mazda.
What? With a handle like Volkswagen chick?
Well, I used to be a Volkswagen mechanic in a previous lifetime.
Oh my goodness.
And I really love Volkswagens, but I had teenagers and there's just nothing left after their teenage years of the Volkswagens. And
I think we saw the picture of one, didn't we? the one that's very sad looking.
Yeah, teenagers can wreak havoc on vehicles, can't they?
Yeah, I burned out our family station wagon, but that's another story for another time. Thank you so much, AmyJune. This was so fabulous, and you could talk for another half hour, and I would. This is a very this is a subject that's dear and near to my heart because, as I said, it's my only claim to having been at all accessible in my last 2 decades of web development. We do have some questions. Are you game? You ready?
Yep.
Okay. Sue Hannons asks how to handle images in a photo gallery on a photo club site.
Okay. I don't exactly know what a photo club site means, but I do know what a photo gallery is. And what's funny is I'm in the process of writing a presentation on accessible slideshows. So I've been learning a lot the last few weeks, and there's so much information on how you make your images accessible in a slideshow, and one of those is alternative text. And the general rule is, if you turn off CSS or JavaScript in your browser, you'll see that the images are kind of stacked. Mm-hmm. The same rules apply for any image in a photo gallery that applies to any sort of image on your website. So you need to make sure that whatever kind of image it is, you have the appropriate alt text. So from a usability, this is kind of a little bit off topic, but from a usability point of view, photo galleries and slideshows aren't accessible. And statistics show that people usually only click on the first one, so they're ineffectual as well. So if you really like slideshows, you might want to reevaluate that. But there's certain instances where slideshows are really cool, like your friend's wedding and things like that. So you just want to make sure that you use the same guidelines you do for the alternative for the other images on your site.
Excellent. That makes a lot of sense. When you think of slideshows, are you thinking of sliders per se, or
sliders, or photo galleries, carousels,
okay. All of those. Very few are accessible, is what you're saying.
Right. Well, very few of them are usable too. And if you think about it, like from just a usability point of view, because you have to have, this is a little bit off topic from the image part, but sometimes you can't find the controls, you can't stop the images, all that kind of stuff. So
here's one. If an image with text on it duplicates info in nearby text, do we need to reiterate the text in the alternative text?
Not necessarily. Not if you have it like in a caption or your supporting content around it has it. Then if it's an image of text, you've sort of you've already explained it. They're not missing anything at that point. If you have all of the information around it, like in a caption or in the supporting text, the image itself has now become decorative by definition. So.
And thank you to Jennifer Huang for that question. Carol Stembaugh, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, asks, what tips do you have for incorporating keywords into alt text while still really making it good alt text?
I'm assuming for search engine optimization.
That's what I would assume.
Okay. So I'm not one for search engine optimization. I'm one for like your value holds itself. So your text, you don't want to like dupe anybody, right? You know, with your alternative text, because it does turn, you know, your image into indexable content. So if you're describing the image as it is, if your keywords are applicable, then sure, but I wouldn't inject any keywords in there just for SEO value. I just, you know, because not only do I believe in accessibility, I also believe in like honesty. So there's a fine line sometimes with keywords and what is actually happening in there.
Well, I mean, and by the way, I should confess that that was one of my major ulterior reasons for all of the alt texting that I was doing, was to optimize search engine, you know, being able to find it. And I kind of challenge you a little bit on that, because if no one finds the content, it doesn't matter how great it is, right? I mean,
sure, but your keywords can be in the content around the image. You know, if you really want that keyword to be in the image, maybe you need a different image.
Exactly. I think I totally agree. And like many areas of accessibility, what I've been finding, and hopefully people will grok this too, when you really address it, you know, it raises all boats in the harbor. No matter what area of it you touch, not only can, you know, those people with very specific disabilities be helped, but often, and in many cases, it helps, you know, quite a few other people for maybe entirely different reasons. And I think that's part of it with this too. I believe that writing effective alt text is really not an easy thing. It's not something necessarily that should be left to, as it has been, to just you know, back-end dev guys who just need to get the page done. It's really something that companies should really have somebody good with copywriting. Somebody, don't you think?
And that, I think that it's really important for the person who included the image to write the alt text, because they had an idea about why they included the image, you know, and so they're almost the perfect, especially if it's like, I hate to say this, a decorative image, you know, where there's not a lot going on, but they're using it to evoke that emotion. They know what emotion they're trying to evoke. So having them write it is like really the best practices.
Yeah.
So it is sometimes hard to go back and fix your website, because you're looking at the image and being like, why did this person, like, what's the value of this image? I find that sometimes like trying to, you know, remediate websites. So.
Exactly. Okay, here's one. Okay, this has to do with, you know, my big mistake, which you may have seen in my comments, and others were saying the same thing. I was very proud that I took the time to write, you know, photo of blah 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 and illustration of blah blah blah, and I thought that was adding value. I actually thought that was adding value to what I imagined, you know, a blind person or assistive tech user would get. But a specific question here is, why is it okay to say illustration of, but not to say, you know, image of, GIF of?
So there's two answers to that. One being that screen readers will announce the image by saying image of. So if you say image of, the screen reader is going to read it image of, image of. So that's one of those things. Illustration is something different, because it really talks about what the image is. But again, going back to that cumbersome, the way the screen reader reads the text is, if you're going to say illustration of or photo, maybe not having it at the beginning of your alt text and weaving it in the alt text, or leaving it towards the end. So that way that screen reader experience is a little bit less cumbersome.
I have a question I'll throw in here, and pardon me if you covered this. I was doing a lot of things. Is it? I now realize that, as people have said, that it's good to use just normal punctuation as well, like capitalize the sentence and with a period or whatever you would in normal writing. Is that advocated?
That is completely correct, and I did not cover that, and that's a good point because it's being read by a screen reader. So if you have it all as one long run-on sentence, you might lose some of your readers, or they might not be able to parse the information, you know, the way you intended. So that's a great point, Ron.
Is any punctuation not to be used, like a semicolon or a squiggly?
No, most screen readers are equipped to read them or skip over them, and then the screen reader user sometimes has it programmed what punctuation gets read and what doesn't as well, depending on what kind of technology they're using.
What about camel case use in alt text? Is it going to separate those words?
Yes, camel case is extremely important for all of our things because, like a screen reader, or even identifying it, if I'm looking at the image and I have my images turned off and we have our hashtags all as one lowercase word, it's hard to tell sometimes what it says, especially like if you can make multiple words out of it, you can like lose clarity and it can be muddled, but that screen reader will parse it as individual words and read it instead of one long word.
Yeah, I learned that myself from Meryl Evans, and I give her credit for that as specifically for hashtags. But what I was asking about was alt text. If you jam some words together in alt text, but with a title letter beginning each word, each part of the word, or each part of the phrase, I should say, you're saying the screen reader will space those a little bit.
Yeah, they'll read it just like they would in social media.
Oh, you know? Awesome. That is awesome. Okay.
So that's something for your whole website to think about too. If you use like hashtags or anything like that, you always, you know, like my name, AmyJune, has a capital letter because it sounds really funny as just one long word.
There you go. Yeah, I forgot about your name. It's a perfect example. Let's see. I had another one here. It's okay from Vicky Baptiste. If you are writing how-to content, should you identify screenshots with the word screenshot in the alt text?
I do.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. You want to have that verisimilitude of a reference. This is a real thing here, not an illustration or whatever.
Right.
Cool. Let's see. I think this is a question. I've seen people from Manzanita79. I've seen people add alt text on Instagram between square brackets. The reason for doing this is so that it's available even when you aren't using a screen reader. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's great, and that's something that I don't practice, and I really should. I've been honestly completely lazy about Instagram, but I think that that's really important because another thing that could happen is you're describing the image in a way that they might not think about, you know, what you're trying to draw attention to. So there's all sorts of ideas about that, but I think that's a fabulous best practice. Cool.
Well, I'm afraid that's all that we have time for. I could go on for another hour. I could make up all the questions myself. No, this is my favorite area of accessibility because it uses language. So I just have a few wrap-up thoughts here. Thank you very much, AmyJune Hineline. And I want to remind people that they can continue speaking with AmyJune in the Slack channel if you have access to that. It's the general channel, and you can see a link to it on the homepage for this event. And don't forget to attend the very next talk coming up, The 7 Habits of Highly Accessible Web Content with the fantastic Alicia St. Rose, coming up at 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time in the Sky Tower, way up in this lofty Sky Tower up here. So, see you there.